Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get started. I think most folks are here. And when we get started, we're going to get started in chapter 10 of 1 Maccabees. By way of review, because it's been a couple weeks to get us caught up to where we are and what's going on. The story we've been reading in 1 Maccabees takes place started around 160 BC. Now we're probably around 120 BC. And it's the story of the family that essentially rose up to gain Judea its independence from the Greeks for a time. And as we saw, they were successful in taking a fair chunk of territory, making it independent, albeit with constant attacks, counterattacks from the Greeks outside, trying to take it back, trying to force their own political appointees in. You saw that they rebuilt and rededicated the temple, but who the high priest is has sort of become this political thing, where the Greeks have a candidate for high priest and who isn't qualified, and the and the locals have a candidate for high priest. Judas Maccabees, who the book is named after, and who was the military leader for most of the revolt, just died before we left off last time, and left his brother Jonathan in charge of running things. He hasn't really named himself a king yet, but he's essentially running the independent Judea. We also saw a major turn start to happen where the revolt was started by the fact that the Greek ruler, Antiochus IV Epiphanes, had issued this order, had attempted to eradicate the Jewish religion, to try to force the Jews to follow Greek pagan religion, and had gone to the point of going into the Holy of Holies in the temple, setting up a statue of Zeus and sacrificing a pig to it. At which point the temple was abandoned before it was coming in restored after the revolt. But he had outlawed keeping the Jewish food laws. He had outlawed praying to Yahweh. He had outlawed everything to try and force them into that mold. That is what had inspired the revolt, was that this group of Jews, at least, while a huge portion of the Jews sort of compromised and said, well, okay, Greek is a better language anyway, and you've got poetry and philosophy, and we don't. So they decided that they liked it better. They liked Greek culture better. This group, at least, was trying to follow God, trying to worship Him the correct way. Now that they've gotten to power and gotten their independence, we saw last time how they had started to try to keep their independence a little differently than how they started out, including we saw they made an alliance with Rome, who at this time in history was sort of the Roman Republic. It was still not an empire, it was still a democratic republic, but was an expanding world power that was trying to enlarge its influence in the Middle East. So rather than trusting in God to help them maintain their political independence the way He had helped them gain their political independence in the first place, they've started wheeling and dealing and making alliances and trusting the Romans. And we all know from the New Testament, later history, how that whole thing with the Romans is going to work out. But so this turn has been taken. Okay, and so as we go through the rest of 1 Maccabees, we're going to see that turn, unfortunately, continue. Right at the point we left off, the main thing that's going on, the main crisis, is that there are two different men who are trying to claim the Greek throne of Antioch and all the East, try to claim it over this area. One of them is a guy named Demetrius, who's backed by the Romans, who is sort of a cousin of the Seleucid kings. The Seleucids are the monarchy, remember. They're descended from Seleucus, who is one of Alexander the Great's generals. He's sort of a cousin of that family who the Romans have propped up and who they want in charge. The other one is Alexander, named after Alexander the Great, of course, who is the son of Antiochus Epiphanes, who's the one who did all the horrible things. Okay. And both of them are now trying to be king in Alexander's father's stead. And as a sort of somewhat independent power in the area, in their territory, Judea is getting pulled into this whole fight now. Okay. So unless there are any questions, we'll get started in chapter 10 here. Chapter 10, verse 1. Then in the 160th year, Alexander, the son of Antiochus Epiphanes, went forth and conquered Ptolemais. They made him welcome, and he reigned there. But when Demetrius the king learned this, he gathered a huge army and went out to battle. Demetrius also sent a letter to Jonathan with peaceful words to flatter him. Okay. So Demetrius has control of Antioch, of the actual capital, okay, and has been able to hold off Alexander from taking it. So Alexander goes and takes Ptolemais, takes another major city, ostensibly to use it as now his own power base. Okay. So this is why when Demetrius hears about it, he's upset and gets ready for war. And as I mentioned, we now have this independent power in Judea there. So Demetrius decides, I need to get Jonathan, who's now ruling the Jews. I need to get him on my side so that Judea will be on my side and not his. Verse 4, for he said, let us act with foresight to make peace with him before he sides with Alexander against us. For he will recall the evils we carried out against him and against his brothers and his nation. So he might remember how we were just attacking him a few months ago, trying to take back over his name. You might not take kindly to that. That's the kind of thing that might cause someone to join your opposition, right? So the king gave authority to Jonathan to assemble an army, prepare weapons, and be his ally. He also ordered the hostages in the citadel to be released to him. So, as sort of a goodwill gesture, right? Demetrius decides, I'm going to treat you like one of my allies. So raise some troops so you can come and help me. Oh, and by the way, these hostages I've been holding from our last battle, I'm going to go ahead and release those to you as a gesture of goodwill. Verse 7, then Jonathan entered Jerusalem and read the letter in the presence of all the people and those in the citadel. They were very frightened when they heard the king had given Jonathan authorization to assemble an army. So the men in the citadel returned the hostages to Jonathan, and he brought them back to their parents. Verse 10, soon Jonathan settled in Jerusalem and began to reconstruct the city. He also told the workers to build the walls to surround Mount Zion with square-cut stones for fortification, which they did. Then the foreigners who had been in their fortress built by Maccabees fled. Remember, Maccabees was the general who led the most recent attempt to retake Jerusalem. Each one left his place and departed into his own land. Only some in Beth-zur who had forsaken the law and the commandments remained, for it was a place of refuge. When King Alexander heard about the proposals Demetrius had sent to Jonathan, and was told about the battles and the courageous deeds done by Jonathan and his brothers, as well as what they had suffered, he said, where will we find another like this man? Let us make him our friend and our ally. Okay, so Alexander hears, oh, Demetrius is now turned around and is making friends with this guy. Clearly, he's had a lot of military success, right? He says, we could use him as an ally, so I better make him a better offer than the one Demetrius just made him. So he wrote a letter and sent it to him, saying, Alexander the king to Jonathan his brother, greetings. You notice the flattery. So he's not king of much yet, right? But I, the king, to you, my brother king, my fellow king. Greetings. We have heard you are a mighty warrior and suitable to be our friend. So now we appoint you today as high priest of your people, and command that you be called a friend of the king. He also sent him a purple robe and a golden crown. We ask you to agree with our interests and maintain friendship with us. Okay, so he says, I can make a better offer. Right? So he sends him a purple robe, sends him a crown. He says, I'm appointing you high priest of the Jews. Now, Alexander doesn't, other than Ptolemy, he doesn't control anything, right? He especially doesn't control Judea, but, it's all in the approach, So he says, I'll make you the high priest, right? Now, do you remember what it was way back in Samuel? Do you remember what it was that Saul did that finally got him cut off? King Saul? I know this is the way back machine. He was waiting for Samuel to come and offer the sacrifices to God before they went into battle, and he got impatient, and so he decided to do it himself. So he wasn't a priest, right? That wasn't his job, right? So, do you think that this pagan, right, making Jonathan both a king and a priest, remember he's not a Levite, he's sort of an honorary Simeonite, good thing or bad thing, right? Right? So we would hope he would say, oh, far be it from me. Right. Verse 21, so Jonathan in the 7th month of the 160th year put on the holy robe at the Feast of Tabernacles. Then he gathered an army and stockpiled weapons. So that turn has continued. Right? That turn has continued. Jonathan now has set himself up as both the king and military leader and as the high priest.
Can't do that.
Yeah. Okay. So we went from we need to fight to preserve the purity of the worship of God to, I think I'd make a good high priest and king while I'm at it. This shift has been taken. Verse 22, when Demetrius heard these reports, he was disturbed and said, what is this that we have done? Alexander has upstaged us by forming a relationship with the Jews for support. So he hears about this and says, man, they one-upped me. Now they're going to side with him. I also will write them words of encouragement and promise them glory and gifts, that they may be my support. So he sent them the following message. King Demetrius, to the nation of the Jews, greetings. Since you have kept your agreements with us and maintained our friendship and have not sided with our enemies, we have learned of this and rejoice. Even now, do continue to keep faith with us, and we will repay you good things for your deeds. We will grant you many prerogatives and give you gifts. At this time, I am releasing and exempting all Jews from tribute and salt taxes and from crown levies. No taxes. Okay. Furthermore, instead of handing over to me a third of the harvest and half of the fruit of the trees which I am due, I cancel them from this day forward and beyond. I will not extract them from those of Judah, nor from the 3 provinces annexed to them from Samaria and Galilee from now on. In addition, let Jerusalem and her vicinities be set apart and released from tithes and taxes. I am also releasing my control of the citadel in Jerusalem, and I give it to the high priest that he may place men in it whom he himself chooses to guard it. So every soul of the Jews taken captive from the land of Judah into all my kingdom I release freely without payment. Let all officials also cancel the duties on their livestock. Okay.
Under the authority of the king, so
Technically, no.
basically he's canceling taxes that he can't.
That he hasn't been able to collect for years anyway. Yes. Because they had that revolt.
Against the taxes in the first place.
But that's why when he starts out, he says, which I am due. I'm entitled to all these taxes, but I'll just forget about it, Verse 34, moreover, all the feasts, the Sabbaths, the new moons, the appointed days, as well as the 3 days prior to the feast and 3 days after the feast, let all these days be established as exempt and released for the Jews in my kingdom. No one will have the power to exact anything from them or to trouble any of them about anything. So he makes all the Jewish holidays national holidays. Let the number of Jews in the army of the king be limited to 30,000 men, and let the stipend that is due to all the troops of the king be paid to them. So he's I'm not going to draft anybody, right? And I'm actually going to pay the Jewish troops the amount that I pay all the other troops, which tells you that before that they weren't getting paid as much as he was paying all the other troops. They're getting drafted and paid nothing. Some of them are to be established in the great fortresses of the king, and some are to be set in positions of trust wherever the kingdom has need. Let their officers and leaders be taken from them, and let them live by their own laws, as the king commanded in the land of Judah. As for the 3 provinces added to Judea from the country of Samaria, let them be considered as one, so it may not be subject to any other authority than the high priest. So what's he saying there? He's basically he's making an offer. He's making an offer to Jonathan to say, look, you come back under my authority, and I'll let you be the governor not only of this little independent province you eked out, but I'll give you Samaria, I'll give you the adjoining lands too to be the governor over. As long as you come back under my authority. Verse 39, I have given Ptolemy and the land adjoining it as gifts to the sanctuary of Jerusalem for regular expenses in the sanctuary. Who's in charge of Ptolemy right now?
Alexander.
I'll tell you what, I'll give you this city. What do you think is going to be involved there? Oh, I kind of need your help to take it back, right? I also grant 15,000 silver shekels yearly out of the king's revenues from the appropriate places. Even all the surplus the officials did not pay, as in the first years, from now on they will give for the works of the temple. Moreover, the 5,000 shekels of silver which the officials received every year from the incomes of the sanctuary, these are also canceled because they belong to the priests who minister there. So he's saying, by the way, that money I've been taking out of your temple treasury, I'll stop. Further, whoever takes refuge at the temple of Jerusalem and any of its vicinities because he owes a royal payment or any debt, let him be released and receive back all his property in my kingdom. The expense of rebuilding and restoring the structures of the sanctuary is also to be paid from the king's revenue. Then too the expenses of rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem and the fortifications around it are to be paid from the king's revenue, and also the rebuilding of the walls in Judea. So finally he says, I see you're doing all these rebuilding projects. I don't know how that got damaged. Right, it was him. I tell you what, I'll take care of paying for all this rebuilding you're doing. Verse 46, but when Jonathan and the people heard these words, they did not believe or accept them, because they remembered the great wrongs Demetrius had done in Israel and how badly he had afflicted them. Right? Because it wasn't that long ago. They remember who this guy is. So they favored Alexander because he was the first to offer peaceable words to them. Therefore they remained allied with him all his days. Now King Alexander assembled a large army and took positions opposite Demetrius. The 2 kings met in battle, and the army of Demetrius fled. Alexander took pursuit and defeated them. He fought very hard until sunset, and Demetrius fell on that day.
They chose the right side, didn't they?
So, well, they chose the winning side.
That's what,
Right
that's
side.
what I'm
So Demetrius is now out of the picture. Okay, Alexander is now pretty much uncontested for the Seleucid throne in Antioch. And so now that he's taking care of his rival, he's going to try and further solidify his power. Verse 51, then Alexander sent envoys to Ptolemy, the king of Egypt, with the following message. Since I returned to my kingdom and have taken the throne of my fathers and established my rule, for I defeated Demetrius and secured control of my country. I faced him in war, and he and his forces were destroyed by us, and we indeed have sat down upon the throne of his kingdom. Now let us build a friendship with each other. Give me your daughter in marriage, and I will become your son-in-law. I will give you gifts worthy of both you and her. Then Ptolemy the king answered, saying, it was a good day when you went back to your father's homeland and occupied the throne of their kingdom. Now I will do for you what you requested. So meet me at Ptolemais, that we might see each other, and I will be your father-in-law as you asked." Then Ptolemy left Egypt along with his daughter Cleopatra. That's not the famous Cleopatra. Yeah, it's about 100 years early. It was a family name. They reached Ptolemais in the 162nd year. King Alexander met him there, and Ptolemy gave him his daughter Cleopatra in marriage. He celebrated her wedding in Ptolemais with great pageantry and royal manner. And so Alexander now marries the daughter of the king of Egypt and all Africa. Right? So he's got a pretty secure alliance in terms of not getting attacked. Okay, so he's now got a pretty solid hold on his part of the world. Verse 59, "Then King Alexander wrote for Jonathan to meet him. So he journeyed with splendor to Ptolemais, and there met the two monarchs. He offered them silver and gold and gave their friends numerous gifts. Thus he found favor with them." Now notice, it's not they gave a bunch of gifts to Jonathan. Jonathan came and met the king from Alexandria in Egypt and our friend Alexander and gave them gold and silver as tribute, and therefore was accepted by them. Right? So this isn't like Solomon, where his splendor was so great that people came from around the world to right? This is Jonathan, who's now set himself up as the king and the high priest, trying to sort of get in with the political crowd, with the power crowd. Verse 61, "Then some troublemakers from Israel, lawless men, also gathered against Jonathan to accuse him. But the king paid no attention to them. The king then gave command to remove Jonathan's clothes and robe him in purple, and they did. Then the king seated him with himself and said to his leaders, 'Go out with him into the midst of the city and proclaim that no one should accuse him concerning any matter. And let no one trouble him for any cause.' So it was that when his accusers saw the honor given him according to the proclamation, and saw him robed in purple, they fled. Thus the king honored him and inscribed him among his close friends. He also appointed him general and provincial governor. Then Jonathan departed to Jerusalem with peace and gladness of heart." Should he have had peace and gladness of heart?
No.
Gladness of heart? Because what has he just done? His father and his older brother both died fighting a revolution against Alexander's father, so he could be independent from this pagan power.
He just joined.
And now, in order to become high priest and governor, get the wealth and the money and the power, he's just befriended him. Right? Okay, verse 67. "Now in the 165th year, Demetrius, the son of Demetrius," that's the son of this Demetrius, who died. So Demetrius the second. Traveled from Crete to the land of his fathers. When King Alexander heard it, he was very distressed and went back to Antioch. Okay, so he hears, oh great, right? Now I got to deal with this. His son's now coming to try and reclaim his father's throne. Then Demetrius appointed Apollonius governor of Coele-Syria, or Greater Syria. Apollonius gathered a large army and marched against Jamnia. He sent word to Jonathan the high priest, saying, "You alone rose up against us, but I was ridiculed and disgraced because of you. Why do you maintain authority over us in the hill country? Now therefore, if you trust in your army, come down against us in the plain and let us judge together for ourselves there, for I have an army of the cities. Inquire and learn who I am and the others who help us. They tell us there is no place for your foot to stand before us, because your fathers were put to flight twice in their land. Even now you shall not be able to withstand such a cavalry and army in the plain, where there is neither stone nor pebble nor any place to flee." So when Demetrius II arrives, he appoints his own governor for the area, Apollonius. And Apollonius then sends word to Jonathan, saying, you didn't fall in line with Demetrius, right? Now the chickens are coming home to roost, right? He takes a couple other pot shots that put to flight in your own land that was exile, right? He's talking about how, your people aren't so great, and he calls them out to meet him in the plain rather than fighting in the hills, right? Because remember, during the revolt especially, they were fighting in the hill country because they could do guerrilla raids, even though they had smaller groups of people. They could hide in caves, they could hide in, sort of jump out, attack, and then retreat again. He's saying, come out, meet me out in the field. Your guys on one side, my guys on the other. Then we'll see. We'll see who wins. Verse 74, but when Jonathan heard the words of Apollonius, he was moved to action. He chose 10,000 men and departed from Jerusalem, and his brother Simon joined to help him. He took up a position at Joppa, but the men of that city shut its gates, for Apollonius had a band of soldiers in Joppa. So Jonathan attacked them. Then the men of Joppa became fearful and opened the gates, and Jonathan captured Joppa. Okay, so Joppa at first, Apollonius has some guys there who shut the gates to him to not help him, but then the guys kind of get scared when they see Jonathan's army and decide to let him have the city. When Apollonius got word of it, he gathered 3,000 cavalry and a sizable army and marched into Azotus as though he were going beyond. But he went ahead into the plain since he had a large cavalry and trusted in it. Jonathan chased him to Azotus, and there the armies joined in battle. But Apollonius secretly had left 1,000 cavalry behind. Jonathan discovered there was an ambush behind him, for they encircled his army and shot arrows at his troops from morning till sundown. But his army stood their ground as Jonathan had ordered, and their cavalry grew tired. Then Simon brought in his army and confronted the phalanx in battle, for the cavalry had grown tired, and they were crushed by him and fled. When the cavalry was scattered on the plain, they retreated to Azotus, entered Beth Dagon, their pagan temple, to hide. Where we saw Beth Dagon means house of Dagon. We saw Dagon once before, when the Philistines were worshiping him. I talked about how the Philistines were descended from the Cretans, so their religion was connected to the Greek religion. Dagon is not actually the name of the god. Dagon means little fish in Hebrew. It was probably a temple to Poseidon. And as usual, as we saw with some other names like Beelzebub and stuff, the Jews made up these names for pagan gods to make fun of them. So this is, instead of Poseidon, Lord of the Seas, blah 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 blah, it's the little fish. They went to go worship their little fish. Verse 84, then Jonathan set Azotus and the surrounding cities on fire and took spoils from them. The temple of Dagon and those who took refuge in it were burned up in the fire. So 8,000 men fell by the sword along with those who were killed by the fire. Then Jonathan left there and camped opposite Ashkelon, and the men of the city came out with great ceremony to meet him. Jonathan and the men with him later went back to Jerusalem with many spoils. Thus when King Alexander heard these reports, he proceeded to honor Jonathan again. So he sent him a gold buckle, as was customary to give to the relatives of kings. He also gave to him Ekron and all its regions as his possession. So he gives him some more territory, gives him this gold buckle which Jonathan accepts, which says, your family. Remember, his dad is the guy who was so wicked, they had to have this revolt, and now Jonathan is part of that family. Is happy to accept that. Chapter 11. Then the king of Egypt gathered together a large army, like sand along the seashore, and many ships, and he sought to obtain possession of Alexander's kingdom by deceit, and to add it to his kingdom. Remember that whole marry my daughter thing? Turns out it didn't mean as much to Ptolemy as it did to Alexander. So he set out for Syria with words of peace, and those from the cities were open to him and met with him, because King Alexander ordered them to meet with him, because he was his father-in-law. But when Ptolemy entered the cities, he set a band of soldiers in every city. Okay, so Ptolemy, who's the king of Egypt, goes on this little tour of the adjoining kingdom of Syria to visit his son-in-law, and he stops in all these cities. But as he goes, he leaves these little garrisons of troops behind him in each of the cities. Verse 4, but when they neared Azotus, they showed him the temple of Dagon, which had been burned, and Azotus and the surrounding fortifications that were destroyed, and the bodies of those lying about, whom Jonathan had burned in the war. For they made heaps of them in his path. Now, this seems like just kind of a gross detail, right? Heaps of burned bodies. But let's go back to Tobit. What was Tobit doing when we met him? That was such a great thing and showed what a great man he was. A great act of charity. He was going out and burying bodies. Right? He's going out and burying bodies because it was this horrible dishonor to leave bodies laying out. Right? To be desecrated like that. Remember, the whole purpose of the revolt was to try to return to God's law. How is Jonathan acting now? It's not just that he's made friends with them. Right? It's his whole, he's behaving like one of them. Right?
The temple of Dagon and those who took refuge in it were burned up in the fire. Everybody burned refuge in it, or they soldiers?
Well, probably soldiers and people from the city. He burned the cities too. He burned the cities around it. Yeah.
Which also is against the law.
Right.
If you don't bury it, if you bury it.
Right. So he goes and kills it, then just leaves them lying around and piles them in heaps. Right. Verse 5, they also told the king what Jonathan had done so as to blame him, but the king remained silent. Jonathan then met the king in Joppa with great ceremony, and they greeted each other and stayed the night there. Jonathan journeyed with the king to the river Eleutherus, and then went back to Jerusalem. Now, though they say so as to blame him, keep in mind who they're talking to, right? Jonathan is ostensibly Alexander's friend now. But put yourself in King Ptolemy's position. You're a good Greek, right? And you're a good pagan religious Greek. A whole bunch of Greek people went and took refuge in the temple of one of your gods. And this guy came and burned it down and killed all of them. Right? So not a lot of respect being shown. So from the Jewish perspective, he did it wrong. But from the pagan Greek perspective, he did it wrong too. Verse 8, thus King Ptolemy ruled over the coastal cities as far as Seleucia by the sea and devised evil plans against Alexander. So he sent ambassadors to King Demetrius II, saying, come, let us enter into a covenant with one another. I will give you my daughter Alexander's wife in marriage, and you will reign over your father's kingdom. Not, I've got another daughter.
Same.
How about we make her available and make her your wife? Verse 10, for I regret giving him my daughter since he tried to kill me. Thus Ptolemy blamed Alexander because he desired his kingdom. So he took back his daughter and gave her to Demetrius. Therefore he was estranged from Alexander, and their animosity was evident. As you might expect. Verse 13, then Ptolemy entered Antioch and assumed the crown of Asia. So he wore 2 crowns on his head, that of Egypt and that of Asia. But King Alexander was in Cilicia at this time, for the inhabitants there were in revolt. Okay, so a revolt breaks out in Cilicia. It's kind of a weird way they told the time frame.
Who is friends with him and who is revolting against him?
Right.
Can you straighten it out?
Well, there's a revolt in Cilicia, so Alexander takes his army to go put down that revolt. Okay, and while he's putting down that revolt, his now former father-in-law rides into town and takes his throne in the capital. Okay, so now Alexander in Cilicia finds out what his former father-in-law just pulled. Okay, is where we're at. Verse 15, when Alexander heard of it, he engaged him in battle. So Ptolemy went out with a mighty force and faced him, putting him to flight. Then Alexander took refuge in Arabia, seeking safety. King Ptolemy was held in great honor. So Zabdiel the Arab cut off Alexander's head and sent it to Ptolemy. So that didn't go so well for him. So he flees into what's now Saudi Arabia, the Arabian Peninsula desert, right? Hoping he'll find some nomadic tribe he can take refuge with, and he picks the wrong nomadic tribe. Because they happen to really like King Ptolemy, and so they chop off his head and send it back for the reward. Verse 18, but King Ptolemy died 3 days later, and his garrisons and the fortresses were destroyed by the inhabitants of those fortresses. Thus, in the 167th year, Demetrius became king. Okay, so if you follow that, what happens is Ptolemy comes to try to take over this whole big chunk of the world, but dies. Okay, in the process, Alexander gets killed. So now Demetrius II sort of has no opposition, right? So he's able to now take the throne by virtue of these people all killing each other. And this is the family that Jonathan wants to be a part of. Verse 20, in those days Jonathan gathered men from Judea to attack the citadel in Jerusalem, and he built many engines of war for use against it. Because there's still this section of the city, essentially the military ward of the city, that still has pagan troops in it. Okay. Now remember, he was friends and the governor and under Alexander. Alexander's dead. Right? And remember the letter he got from Demetrius and Apollonius. They are not Jonathan's friend. In verse 22, when the king heard this, he was enraged, and he broke camp and went to Ptolemais. He wrote Jonathan that he was to lift the siege and to meet him in Ptolemais at once for a conference. But when Jonathan heard this, he issued orders to continue the siege. Then he chose some elders of Israel and some priests and put himself in danger. For he took silver, gold, clothing, and many other friendly gifts, and went to the king in Ptolemais, and Jonathan found favor with him. So what does he do again?
Sucking up to another.
Does he return to his, no wait, we were supposed to be independent so we could worship God the way he wanted to be? No. Right? He says, oh well, new king, better make friends. Okay. Verse 25, again some lawless men from the nation accused Jonathan, but the king did to him as those before him had done, and exalted him in front of all his friends. He also confirmed him in the high priesthood and whatever other honors he held before, and considered him as one of his best friends. Then Jonathan asked the king to exempt Judea from taxes along with the 3 provinces and Samaria, and promised him 300 talents. The king was pleased and wrote Jonathan a letter concerning all these things. So basically what he's saying is, why don't I just send you this amount of money every year rather than you taxing the people? Right? The king says, well, that's fine because that's a reliable source of income. Right? I don't have to send out tax collectors. I don't have to throw anybody in prison who doesn't pay. I don't have to deal with all that mess. I'll just have a steady income. Okay, the king was pleased and wrote Jonathan a letter concerning all these things. Its message was as follows. King Demetrius to his brother Jonathan in the nation of the Jews, greetings. The copy of this letter, which we wrote to Lasthenes, our relative, concerning you, we have copied also to you, that you might know what it says. This is the first CC. King Demetrius to his father Lasthenes, greetings. To the nation of the Jews, our friends, and who do what is right towards us, we have decided to do good because of their goodwill towards us. We have established the borders of Judea for them and the 3 provinces of Apharim, Elida, and Rathamim. They were added to Judea from Samaria, as well as all the areas bordering them. All who offer sacrifices in Jerusalem we have released from the royal taxes which the king received from them each year, from the harvest of the earth and fruit of the trees. Any other payments due us from now on from the tithes, the salt pits, and the crown taxes, from all these we grant release. None of these provisions will be canceled from now on for all time. Now therefore take heed to make a copy of this, and let it be given to Jonathan and put in a notable place on the holy mount. When King Demetrius saw the land was peaceful before him, and no one was opposed to him, he dismissed his troops, each to their own place, except the foreign soldiers whom he had recruited as mercenaries from the islands of the nations. The islands of the nations, just so you know, because we're going to see this a lot. We're going to see this referred to in the Psalms. They're going to talk about the islands of the Gentiles in some of the prophetic books. The islands are referring to the islands in the Mediterranean. Both the Greek islands and Crete, Cyprus, those are the islands. And in this case, it's referring to literally those islands. But it's often used in Hebrew poetry just to refer to sort of far off, exotic places. You know, those places out in the sea, which is the Mediterranean for them, you know. So all the soldiers who had served his fathers hated him. Okay. Exactly. Right. He decides not to keep a standing army. He looks around and says, well, I don't have anybody challenging me for the throne. I don't have anybody attacking me from outside. So I don't need to go to all the expense of paying to take care of all these men and all these horses and all these, right? So he sends them all home, which means what? They're going to have to find some way to make a living themselves.
That
right?
means turn on him.
They're going to have to go back to farming. They're going to have to go back to... So that makes him not very popular with the professional soldiers.
There's not too much call for professional soldiers.
No, unless you want to become a mercenary again. And if there's peace, then you're not going to have a lot of job opportunities. Verse 39, now Trypho formerly had been one of Alexander's supporters. He saw that all the soldiers complained against Demetrius. So he approached Demalcu the Arab, who was rearing Antiochus, the young son of Alexander. Back over here. Over here, you've got this little baby boy, Antiochus the Fifth, right? Who would be potentially the next person to claim the throne. So Trypho, who was one of the soldiers who had worked for Alexander, knows about this kid, right? Obviously isn't real happy with this king. Okay, so what kind of plan do you think he's going to concoct here? So verse 40, he insisted that he hand Antiochus over to him so as to make him king in place of his father. He told Demalcu everything Demetrius had done and the hatred his troops had for him, and he remained there many days. So he's thinking, Trypho is thinking, this is a safe bet, right? Because I've got all these soldiers who are loyal to me. They know me. I'm one of them. And if he tries to raise an army to fight back, none of those soldiers are going to go work for him again. They're all mad at him. Verse 41, meanwhile Jonathan sent to King Demetrius the request that he remove the soldiers in the citadel from Jerusalem, as well as those in the fortresses, for they were at war with Israel. Then Demetrius sent to Jonathan, saying, not only will I do these things for you and your nation, but I will greatly honor you and the Jewish nation when I have the opportunity, and you will do rightly to send me soldiers who will ally with me, because all my troops have revolted. Okay, so what this is saying is, Jonathan, he's been doing pretty good, so he decides to press his luck. He says, I want you to get all the Syrian soldiers out of Judea. Right? And Demetrius says, okay. He's been sending them home anyway. Right? And he knows they're not real loyal now. Right? He says, but in return, I want you to promise that if I need soldiers, I'll get soldiers from Judea who might theoretically now be loyal to him still, unlike the Syrians. Verse 44, so Jonathan sent him 3,000 very able men to him at Antioch. When they came to the king, he was very glad at their arrival. Then men from the city gathered within the city, 120,000 of them, and they wanted to kill the king. But the king fled into the palace, and those from the city seized the streets of the city, and they began to fight. So the king summoned the Jews for help, and they all rallied around him and dispersed throughout the city. On that day they killed about 100,000 men. And they set the city on fire, took many spoils on that day, and rescued the king. When the men of the city realized the Jews had gained control of the city at will, they lost their courage and called out to the king with this request: restore the peace and make the Jews quit fighting us in the city. So they threw down their weapons and made peace. Then the Jews were honored before the king and before all those in his kingdom. After this they returned to Jerusalem with many spoils. Okay, so he gets this private garrison of Jewish troops just in time for a riot to break out in Antioch, which nearly destroys the city, and those Jewish troops help him put down the riot. Verse 52, thus King Demetrius ruled on the throne of his kingdom, and the land was peaceful before him. But he broke his word about everything he promised Jonathan. Thus he became estranged from him and did not repay Jonathan the favors he had done for him, but greatly afflicted him. We're going to get a little bit more in detail, but basically what that's saying is those troops never really went away from Judea. The other promises he made him about the taxes didn't come true either. And so, in verse 54, later Trypho returned and had with him the young boy Antiochus, who put on the crown and became king. All the troops who had cursed Demetrius gathered around him. They fought against Demetrius, who was put to flight. Trypho then captured the elephants and gained control of Antioch. So Antiochus the younger wrote to Jonathan, saying, I confirm you in the high priesthood, set you over the 4 provinces, and you will be one of the king's friends. He also sent him gold cups to serve him at table, gave him authority to drink from these, to dress in purple, and to wear a golden buckle. He then established Simon his brother as general from the ladder of Tyre to the boundary of Egypt. Okay, so now not only when Demetrius II is gone, Antiochus V, grandson of our original bad guys, now the king, reaffirms his family and friendship and everything with Jonathan, and makes Jonathan's brother his general for the whole seacoast. Right, for the whole seacoast, which he's happy to accept. Now, on top of everything else, what are we seeing about Jonathan's loyalty to anyone or anything?
He goes wherever the guy got the most.
Right, he goes wherever he gets the best offer, right?
I guess my question is, why are the Jews still with? I guess Yahweh has to give them up on it.
Well, they're not being attacked anymore.
Yeah, but
They're in the middle of the Greeks are fighting each other. And then whoever wins, Jonathan just allies himself with.
well, but he's been fighting and winning these massive battles.
Well, between one group of Greeks and another group of Greeks. No one's attacking Judea.
So he's just a smart general. He's not.
Right now, well, not so much a smart general as a smart political player.
Well, I mean, there's large numbers of people with smaller armies, so that's a familiar pattern.
Well, those were the only place we saw that was in that riot, which was army versus civilians. So they're not defending Judea right now. And every time someone more powerful comes along, Jonathan switches his allegiance over to the new stronger guy who looks like he's the up and comer. Right, but there's no again the revolt was started based on these principles, right? These religious principles now gone. Right? It's just purely we got to stay on the winning side. Do what's best for us. And with Jonathan, do what's best for Jonathan. Then Jonathan departed and journeyed beyond the river and in the cities. The entire army of Syria gathered around him as allies. When he went into Ashkelon, the people of the city met him and honored him. From there he left for Gaza, but when the inhabitants of Gaza shut him out, he besieged the city, set its surrounding fortifications on fire, and plundered them. Thus the men of Gaza pleaded with Jonathan. He made peace with them, took the sons of their governors as hostages, and dispatched them to Jerusalem. Then he traveled through the country, going as far as Damascus. So, remember when we first met Antiochus the Fourth, Epiphanes, right at the beginning of 1 Maccabees, what he was doing? He won a big victory against Egypt. And so on the way back, he stopped at all the recalcitrant cities, including Jerusalem, which is why he did the whole thing with sacrificing the pig to El Jerusalem, right? What's Jonathan doing now?
Same thing.
Same thing. He's behaving exactly like his new friends. So verse 63, Jonathan also got word the officers of Demetrius had arrived in Kadesh in Galilee with a sizable army. They intended to oust him from office. So he set out to meet them, but he left his brother Simon in the country. Then Simon positioned himself at Bethzur and for many days fought against it and blocked it off. Then the people begged him for peace, and he granted it to them. So he cast them out from there, took possession of the city, and placed a garrison in it. Now Jonathan and his soldiers camped by the lake of Gennesaret, which is the Sea of Galilee. and rose early the next morning and marched to the plain of Hatzor. Then behold, the foreign army met him in the plain and set up an ambush against him in the mountains. But they themselves met him face to face. Then the men in the ambush rose up from their places and joined the battle. All Jonathan's men fled. None of them remained except Mattathias the son of Absalom and Judas the son of Calphi, commanders of the armed forces. So Jonathan tore his garments, poured earth on his head, and prayed. Now all of a sudden, despite him being a high priest, have we ever seen him pray? Have we ever seen him do anything? Have we ever seen him even mention God? No. But now all of a sudden, his troops have all fled. He's up in this tree, he's in the middle of battle. Oh boy, now he tears his, puts Ashdod on his head and starts crying out to God, right? Now he's been outmaneuvered. Verse 72, that he turned back to the battle and put the enemy to flight. When Jonathan's men who had run away saw this, they returned and joined him in the pursuit of the enemy as far as Kadesh, and there they set up camp. As many as 3,000 of the foreign army fell that day. Then Jonathan went back to Jerusalem. Now someone might look at this and learn a lesson, right? They might say, wow, I went out there with all my planning, with my brother, my best general, and I almost got killed until I asked God for help, right? And he might say, this is what started this whole revolt in the first place. I need to stop trusting in my own political wheeling and dealing in my own. I need to start trusting in God, right? That might be what we hope, right? We hope might happen next. Chapter 12, verse 1. When Jonathan saw the time was right, he chose envoys and sent them to Rome to validate and renew friendship with them. Right? Just the opposite. Wow, I almost lost that battle. Right? I better secure my alliances. I better secure my position. Right? So first, he goes to renew the treaty with Rome. Verse 2, also he sent letters to Sparta and other localities for the same reasons. Okay? So he decides, maybe Rome isn't enough. They're kind of far off. It's going to take them a while to get any troops here. Right? I might need them. Let's try some closer people. And one of them is Sparta. Verse 3, so they left for Rome, entered the Senate chamber, and said, Jonathan the high priest and the nation of the Jews sent us here to renew the former friendship and alliance between ourselves. Then the Romans wrote letters to the citizens in every place, so they might send forth the ambassadors to the land of Judah in peace. Verse 5, this is the copy of the letters which Jonathan wrote to the Spartans. We're going to read this carefully. This is his opening message. Remember, Spartans, pagan Greeks, just like all these guys. Jonathan, the high priest, the elders of the nation, the priests, and the Jewish people to their brothers, the Spartans. Greetings. Sometime earlier, letters were sent to Onias, the high priest, by Arius, who ruled over you, that you are our brothers, as the attached copy indicates. Onias received the envoy with honor, and he accepted the letters, which plainly showed the alliance and friendship. Therefore, although we do not need these things, since we have the holy books in our hands, we have decided to send and renew our brotherhood and friendship, so we would not be estranged from you. What's he talking about? This brotherhood in these holy books. Well, we're going to see here in a second. It's going to be kind of surprising. For a significant time has elapsed since you sent word to us. Therefore, at every opportunity, both on feast days and ordinary days, we remember you unceasingly in the sacrifices we offer and in our prayers, as it is right and proper to remember brothers. For we rejoice in your glory, the glory of the Spartans. But many troubles and many wars have surrounded us, and the kings around us have fought against us. We did not wish to trouble you and our other allies and friends with these wars, for we have had help from heaven assisting us, for we were freed from our enemies, and they were humbled. Now you notice, he doesn't say help from our God, right? Definitely doesn't say Yahweh. He says we've received help from the heavens. See, that's nice. It's open to interpretation, right? Could be Zeus, right? Could be a lot of people. Verse 16, therefore we chose Numenius, son of Antiochus, and Antipater, son of Jason, and sent them to Rome to renew our friendship and alliance with them. We also order them to go to you to greet you and give you these letters from us concerning the renewal of our brotherhood. Now then, please send us a reply." And now here, this is the copy of the letters they sent to Onias. "King Arius of the Spartans, to Onias the high priest, greetings. It has been put in writing regarding both the Spartans and the Jews that they are brothers and are both of the family of Abraham. So now that we know this, please write us concerning your welfare. Thus we are writing to you that your cattle and possessions are ours and ours are yours. Therefore we order our ambassadors to report to you accordingly." So, what this is alluding to is that they trumped up a bunch of fake paperwork, possibly fake books of the Bible, what we would call books of the Bible, right? Because remember he says we have the holy books in hand. Right? To say that the Spartans were also descended from Abraham. Like the Jews. Right? Which of course we know they weren't. Right? In fact, the genealogies in Genesis we saw that the Greeks were descended from Japheth after the flood. Right? They're not connected in any way. So, remember, what started the revolt? We need to be true to the Torah that God has given us.
Oh,
Now, not only are they forming these alliances, they're faking their own history, right? They're falsifying and altering their own tradition
but
to try to make these alliances.
how did they do that if they had priests there and had Torah and knew straight up that was basically garbage?
Who are
They
the
do it.
Who are the priests now?
Well, that's what I'm saying.
Jonathan's the high priest, right?
Okay, so
Is he a Levite?
No, nobody knows.
Is he descended from Aaron?
They can basically say, "Well, we're going to add a couple of new books to the Bible and appease these people."
Right. So he's
Okay.
he's now just openly sacrificing. The whole purpose was to try to save. And not only is he ignoring it, he's actually going and falsifying it. And changing it. Okay? So they said this is all going to be important as we're going to see going forward here. So this is how they got their alliance with Sparta. Right? It's through falsifying this false shared history. Verse 24, "Then Jonathan heard the officers of Demetrius had come back with a larger army than before to make war against him. So he marched out of Jerusalem and engaged them in the area around Hamath, giving them no chance to invade his country. So he sent out spies to their encampment. They later returned and told him the army of Demetrius planned to attack the Jews at night. At sunset, Jonathan ordered those with him to stay awake and to be ready with their weapons for a fight during the night. Then he set out an advance guard to surround the camp. When the enemy got word that Jonathan and his soldiers were ready for battle, they were terrified at heart. So they lit fires in their camp and fled. But Jonathan and his men did not know this until it was morning, for they saw the firelight." Okay. So they leave, but they started fires beforehand, so they don't know that they're gone. So Jonathan chased after them, but could not overtake them, because they crossed over the Eleutherus River. Then Jonathan turned aside against the Arabs, called Zabadeans, and struck them and took their spoils. He then broke camp and marched to Damascus and throughout all that country. Meanwhile, Simon went out and marched as far as Ascalon and the fortresses nearby, and turned aside to Joppa and captured it, for he heard they wished to hand over the fortress to the men sent by Demetrius. So he established a garrison there to guard it. When Jonathan returned, he assembled the elders of the people. Together they decided to build fortresses in Judea and to make the walls of Jerusalem even higher, and raise a great high wall between the citadel and the city to separate it from the city, so it would be isolated and its garrison could not buy nor sell goods. Okay, so they've failed many times at getting these Syrian troops out of the citadel, so they decide, well, let's just build walls and block it off from the rest of the city. And then the Syrians can sit there all they want, right? But they won't be able to do anything. So they assembled to rebuild the city and part of the wall on the valley to the east that had fallen. Thus he repaired the wall that is called Shephanatha. Simon also built Adida and the Shephelah. They fortified it and set up bolted gates. Then Trypho sought to rule Asia, to wear the crown and to stretch forth his hand against King Antiochus. Remember, Antiochus is still a kid, right? Trypho was the general who actually, had the power. He decides, I'm the one who really took the throne, not that kid. I'm the one who should be king, right? He also took precautions lest Jonathan would not permit it, but wage war against him. So seeking to capture and destroy him, he marched forth to Bethshan. So Trypho he's observed, he's been a soldier for a while, he's observed Jonathan's behavior, how he switches allegiances so quickly, right? So rather than him going and trying to get Jonathan on his side, he just says, Jonathan's a loose cannon, right? I don't know who he's going to side with in this war, so I need to just take him out of the picture, so he's not an issue. So Jonathan went out to meet him with 40,000 soldiers chosen for battle, and he came to Bethshan. When Trypho saw that he came with a large army, he was afraid to stretch forth his hand against him. So he received him honorably and met him with all his friends. He gave gifts to Jonathan and ordered his friends and his own troops to obey him as himself. Then he said to Jonathan, "Why have you troubled all these men? We are not at war. Now send them home, but choose a few soldiers for yourself to be with you. Then come with me to Ptolemais, and I will give it over to you along with the rest of the fortresses and the remaining troops and officers. Then I will turn around and go home, for that is why I came here." So what happens is Trypho is Antiochus' general, right? He's planning to take the throne. Jonathan doesn't know that. So he invites Jonathan out with the intent of ambushing him. But then he sees Jonathan's army and says, maybe not so much. So he backpedals a little, and he receives Jonathan like they're still friends, right? And he says, "Why'd you bring this big army with you? We're all pals here, aren't we? Right? We're all friends. And you just send your army home. Come with me. I was planning on marching on this city, right? Come with me. I'll give the city to you, and then I'll just head home, right? It'll be a good time." Verse 46, so Jonathan believed Trypho and did as he had said and sent away the troops who departed for the region of Judah. But he kept 3,000 soldiers with him, 2,000 of which he left in Galilee, and 1,000 who went with him. But when Jonathan entered Ptolemais, the men of the city shut the gates and captured him, and they slew with the sword all who entered with him. Then Trypho sent soldiers and cavalry into Galilee and the great plain to kill all Jonathan's men. But when the soldiers learned that Jonathan and those with him had been captured and killed, they encouraged each other to keep marching in close formation, ready for attack. But when the pursuers saw them ready to fight for their lives, they retreated. So they all came safely to the land of Judah and cried out for Jonathan and his men. They were exceedingly afraid, and all Israel mourned greatly. Then all the nations surrounding them tried to defeat them, saying, "There is none to lead them or to help them. Now then, let us wage war against them and erase them from memory." So Jonathan finally gets outmaneuvered. Okay, Jonathan's now being held captive in the city of Ptolemais, with Trypho having plans now to go and set himself up as king. Chapter 13. Now Simon learned that Trypho had assembled a huge army to march on the land of Judah and crush it. He saw the people were trembling with fear, so he went to Jerusalem and gathered everyone together. He encouraged them, saying, "You know what my brothers and I and my father's house have done concerning the laws in the sanctuary." Wait, what? Right? So Simon, he's referring to that. Remember the good old days? Right? Remember when this revolt started and we were just a band of misfits out in the hills and we were winning all the battles and everything, right? He's calling it back to that, not recent events. You know, too, the wars and the crises we have seen. This is why all my brothers perished, all for the sake of Israel, and only I am left. Now may my life never be safeguarded in time of trouble, for I am in no way better than my brothers. Thus I will avenge my nation in this sanctuary and your wives and children, for all the nations have hatefully gathered to destroy us. Okay, so he comes, he's the last guy, right? He says, all my brothers died fighting for Israel. I'm going to die fighting for Israel too, get everybody fired up. Thus he rekindled the spirit of the people when they heard these words. They responded with a loud voice, saying, "You lead us in place of Judas and your brother." You detect there Jonathan probably not as popular. Right? Judas said, "Oh yeah, your other brother." Fight our wars, and we will do everything you tell us." So he gathered all the men of fighting age and rushed to finish the walls of Jerusalem. He fortified the city on all sides. Then he sent Jonathan, son of Absalom, with a sizable army to Joppa, and he drove out its people and remained there. Verse 12. Meanwhile, Trypho left from Ptolemais with a large force to come into the land of Judah. Jonathan accompanied him under guard. Now Simon set up camp in Adida opposite the plain. When Trypho heard that Simon had risen up in place of his brother Jonathan and was about to face him in battle, he sent men to him, saying, "We are detaining your brother Jonathan because of the silver he owed the royal treasury and for which he is responsible." So they come out to meet, Simon comes out with his troops to meet him in battle. They say, "Oh, we've got a prisoner because he owes us money." Right? He defaulted on the tax payments he owes us. "Now send 100 talents of silver and 2 of his sons as hostages, that when he is freed he will not rise up against us, then we will free him." So remember, Trypho doesn't really care about Jonathan. Right? He's after the throne. He just wants to make sure Jonathan isn't going to be fighting against him. Right? So he says, "I tell you what, pay off his tax debt, send us 2 of his sons so we can have his hostages." Right? Because then we say, if you rise up against us, we'll kill your sons. That way we don't have to worry about him fighting against us. And we can all go home. Verse 17, Simon sensed they were speaking to him deceitfully, but he sent for the silver and the sons, lest he arouse great hostility among the people. For they might say, because Simon did not give him the money and the sons, Jonathan perished. Right? So Simon knows this isn't a good deal that's about to go down. But he says, if I refuse and they kill Jonathan, and word of that gets back to Israel, I'm done for. Right? I'm done for, because they're going to say it's my fault that he got killed. Then he sent the sons and the 100 talents, but Trypho acted with deceit and would not free Jonathan. Later Trypho arrived to invade Judah to destroy it, and they circled around the road leading to Adora. But Simon and his army advanced along opposite him every place he went. Then men from the citadel sent ambassadors to Trypho, urging him to come to them through the desert and send food for them. Trypho then prepared all his cavalry to come, but there was a heavy snowfall that night, and he could not march through the deep snow. Instead he departed and went into Gilead. When he came near Bascama, he slew Jonathan and buried him there. Then Trypho turned and went to his own country. Yeah. So he's trying to find a way to invade Judah. Right? Basically, Simon and his army are shadowing him the whole time, so he never has a good opportunity. He thinks he might have a good opportunity, so he calls in to get his chariots and his horses, but there's a snowfall, and so he can't get them there in time. So he says, forget about Judah, just kills Jonathan and his sons, and heads back to Syria to take care of his real business. Verse 25, Simon sent men and gathered the remains of his brother Jonathan and buried him in Modin, the city of his fathers. All Israel mourned him with great lament for many days. Simon also built up the tomb of his father and brothers with polished stone in front and back, making it high enough to be seen. He then built 7 pyramids, one opposite the other, for his father and his mother and his 4 brothers. Pyramids.
Where did that come from?
Right, well, there are a lot of societies, right, starting with the Sumerians who built ziggurats, the Egyptians built pyramids.
I know, but aren't these Jews?
That would be the...
I mean, I know they know how to build them, but...
And usually pyramids are built for monarchs, and they've got one for each member of the family.
Right.
So
Right, so he's creating his own little mini Valley of the Kings from Egypt, right, where the royal families were all buried, right? So he gives him a pagan rather than a Jewish burial. So this shows again that turn we took at the end of last time. We're now pretty far the wrong way, when they're burying the high priest according to an Egyptian burial, right? Verse 29, around these pyramids he made engines of war, building massive pillars around them. And upon these pillars he placed suits of armor for a perpetual memorial. And alongside the suits of armor he made carved ships, so they could be seen by everyone sailing the sea. This tomb which he made in Modin exists until this day. if you know about Egyptian burials, right? They bury the pharaoh, boats, chariots, all the things he was going to take with him into the next life, right? So this is a full-on pagan burial here for Jonathan. Verse 31, now Trypho also dealt wickedly with young Antiochus the king and murdered him. Now we've got Trypho who's not related to anybody. Then he became king in his place and wore the crown of Asia, bringing great adversity to the land. Simon thus strengthened the fortresses in Judea, surrounding them with high towers and with thick walls and gates and bolts, storing provisions in the fortresses. Also Simon selected men and sent them to King Demetrius to bring relief for the country, for all Trypho's actions were violent. Remember, Demetrius II was unseated, but he's not actually dead. Okay? He's not actually dead. So the idea is, well, maybe we can get him back. For all Trypho's actions were violent. Then the king sent him a positive answer and wrote of this letter, King Demetrius to Simon the high priest, friend of kings, and to the elders and the Jewish nation, greetings. We received the crown of gold and the palm branch you sent. We are ready to declare general peace with you and to order your officials to cancel your taxes.
Yeah.
Now, has he been collecting any taxes from anybody?
No.
No. Indeed, all the grants we made to you stay intact, and let the fortresses you built remain in your keeping. We also forgive the mistakes committed up to the present day as well, and remove the crown tax you owe. If any other tax has been exacted in Jerusalem, let it be no longer exacted. If some of your men are suited for enrollment in our bodyguard, let them be enrolled, and may there be peace among us. The yoke of the Gentiles was lifted from Israel in the 170th year, and the people began to record in the letters and contracts in the first year of Simon, the great high priest and commander and ruler of the Jews, who they've now made Simon high priest again, because that's now what you call the guy in charge, I guess. Right?
And
So the whole...
he was acting like his brother. It made him look like he was repenting.
Right. And the significance of this writing is this is how all the pagan kings did it. Right? We've been reading these numbers, the 160th year, the 170th year. Those are after Alexander the Great's conquest and the establishment of the Seleucid monarchy. Right? So Seleucus, when he became king, that was year one, is the idea. Right? Because it's all based on the king. So them saying this now, year one of Simon ruling over us as the high priest and commander and ruler. Verse 43, in those days Simon camped at Gazara, surrounding it with soldiers. He also built an engine of war, brought it to the city, and struck and seized one tower. Then the men in the siege engine jumped out and ran into the city, and there was a great commotion in Gazara. The men in the city also climbed up onto the wall with their wives and children, tearing their clothes and crying with a loud voice, pleading to Simon to make peace with them. They said, treat us not according to our evil deeds, but according to your mercy. So Simon made an agreement with them and ceased waging war against them. But he cast them out of the city and purified the houses that contained idols. Thus he entered Gazara with hymns and blessings. He also cast out all uncleanness from it and settled men there who would keep the law. Then he fortified it and built a dwelling there for himself. Now we've seen he hasn't been keeping the law himself real well. Right? But apparently Simon, unlike Jonathan, is at least connected up to the idea that he's trying to get rid of pagan sites of worship. Right? Is the idea. And so when he's taking these cities back, he's getting rid of the pagan worship. Now, I'd want to be charitable, but you have to remember that Simon, in addition to being king, is also the high priest. So he's also forcing everyone to follow him religiously. Right? Which is also a factor here. Verse 49, but the men in the citadel at Jerusalem were prevented from coming and going in the region to buy and sell. So they were extremely hungry. Even the strong among them were dying of hunger. When they called out to Simon to be at peace with them, he did so, and then cast them out from there, purifying the citadel from its defilements. They entered it on the 23rd day of the second month of the 171st year, with praise and palm branches, and with lyres, cymbals, and stringed instruments, and with hymns and songs, because a great enemy had been defeated and cast out of Israel. Thus Simon ordered that each year they should commemorate this day with jubilation. When the Temple Mount was fortified along with the citadel, he himself and his men lived there. Then Simon noted that his son John had reached adulthood, so he appointed him commander of all the army, and he lived in Gazara. So they finally get those Syrian, after all these years, they get those Syrian troops out of, the last of the Syrian troops out of Jerusalem. And where does Simon go to live? But the place where the Syrians had ruled Jerusalem from. Chapter 14. Then in the 172nd year, King Demetrius gathered his troops and went into Media to enlist help for himself to wage war against Trypho. So Demetrius II is trying to stage a comeback. Right? He goes over to Media, which, as we said, is in that mountainous area near the border of what's now Iran. Right? He's looking to try and raise an army to come back and attack Trypho. When Arsaces, king of Persia and Media, learned that Demetrius had entered his borders, he sent one of his officers to capture him alive. So he set out and attacked the camp of Demetrius and captured him and brought him to Arsaces, who put him in prison. The land of Judah was peaceful all the days of Simon, and he sought the good of his nation, and his leadership and his glory pleased them all his days. Then in all his glory he took Joppa for a harbor and made an entrance to the islands of the sea. He enlarged his nation's borders and gained control of his country. He also gathered many captives and ruled Gazara and Beth Zur and the citadel. When he removed from it the uncleanness, no one opposed him. They farmed their land in peace, and the land gave forth its produce, and the trees of the plain their fruit. Elders sat in the streets, talking together of good things, and the young men wore the glories and apparel of war. He supplied the cities with food and furnished them with weapons of defense, until his fame spread to the ends of the earth. He established peace in the land, and Israel rejoiced with great delight. Each one sat under his vine and fig tree, and no one made them afraid. He caused war to cease in the land, and kings were defeated in those days. He fortified all the humble among his people. He demanded adherence to the law and removed all the lawless and evil men. He beautified the sanctuary and multiplied the vessels of the sanctuary. Does anybody see a problem with that particular hymn? Who's the hymn talking
It's
about?
all about him.
It's about him.
Right. It's about Simon.
It's not about God.
So Simon caused war to cease in the land, did he? Right? Simon defeated kings. Simon fed all the people. Right? It's all Simon. Just him being a really good ruler. Verse 16, when it was heard in Rome and as far away as Sparta that Jonathan had died, they were in great sorrow. But when they heard that his brother Simon had been made high priest in his place and was ruling over the land and the cities in it, they wrote to him on bronze plaques to renew the friendship and alliance they had built with him and with his brothers Judas and Jonathan. These tablets were read before all the people gathered in Jerusalem. This is the copy of the letter the Spartans sent. The leaders of the city of the Spartans, to Simon the high priest and the elders and the priests, and to all the Jewish people our brothers, greetings. The ambassadors who were sent by you to our people told us about your glory and honor, and we were overjoyed at their coming. So we recorded what was said by them in our public decrees as follows. Numenius, son of Antiochus, and Antipater, the son of Jason, ambassadors of the Jews, came to renew their friendship with us. Our citizens were pleased to receive them honorably and to place a copy of their words in the public archives, so the people of the Spartans might have a record of them. They also sent a copy of this to Simon the high priest. Later Simon dispatched Numenius to Rome with a large gold shield that weighed 1,000 minas to verify the alliance with them. Okay, so they go and send gifts to Rome, their friends. Remember, as I pointed out last time, you might think, you get to the Old Testament, we go to the New Testament, all of a sudden Rome is taken over, and the whole problem that most of the Jews see is that Rome is dominating Judea, and you think, wow, Rome must have come and conquered them. Again, Rome didn't come and conquer them. Rome was invited in. Rome was invited in. Verse 25, the people heard these words, and they said, how can we show our gratitude to Simon and his sons? For he, his brothers, and his father's house stood strong and waged war with the enemies of Israel by themselves. They didn't have any help from anybody. And secured her freedom. So they wrote these words on bronze tablets and put them on the pillars on Mount Zion. Remember the two pillars in front of the temple? They put these two bronze plaques there. Now you remember what else there's two of? There's the two tablets of the law that God gave to Moses on Mount Sinai that were in the Ark of the Covenant when they had the Ark of the Covenant that was in the most holy place, right? So you had two copies because that was the covenant, that was the binding agreement between God and his people. Okay, well now his people are making their own bronze tablets to go and tack up on the... And here's what they say. On the 18th day of Elul in the 172nd year, which is the third year of the great high priest Simon in the court of God's people, at the large gathering of the priests and people and the rulers of the nation and the elders of the land, the following was made known to us. Since there have often been wars in the country, Simon the son of Mattathias, priest of the sons of Jorib, with his brothers placed themselves at risk and opposed their nation's adversaries, so their sanctuary and the law would be protected, and they honored their nation with great glory. Jonathan also rallied their nation, was made their high priest, and was brought before his people. When their adversaries chose to invade their country and seize their sanctuary, Simon set out to wage war for his country. He spent large amounts of his own money and supplied weapons to the soldiers in his nation's army and paid them wages. Thus he strengthened the cities of Judea and Beth Zur on the boundary of Judea, where the weapons of the enemy were kept, and he established there a garrison of Jews. He also strengthened Joppa by the sea and Gazara on the boundary of Azotus, where the enemy had previously lived. He moved the Jews there and supplied them with whatever they needed for their welfare. When the people saw Simon's dependability and the glory he was committed to bringing to his nation, they chose him as their ruler and high priest. They chose him as their ruler and high priest, because he did all these things and because of the righteousness and good faith he kept toward his nation. In every way he tried to honor his people. Under his rule everything he touched prospered, and he drove out the Gentiles from the land. The men in the city of David in Jerusalem had made a citadel for themselves, from which they went out and defiled the vicinity of the sanctuary and caused great harm to its purity. Then he settled Jews in it and strengthened it for the security of the country and the city, and built up the walls of Jerusalem to greater heights. In light of these accomplishments, King Demetrius established him in the high priesthood. He also made him one of his friends and showed him great honor, for he heard the Jews were called friends, allies, and brothers by the Romans, that they had received Simon's ambassadors with honor. Thus the Jews and the priests were pleased that Simon would be their ruler and high priest forever, until a faithful prophet should arise. They were also pleased that he should be their governor and take responsibility for the sanctuary and choose workers to meet its needs and to look after the country, the weapons, and the fortresses. Indeed, they decided he should look after the sanctuary and be obeyed by all, that all the contracts of the nation should be drafted with his signature, and that he should be vested in purple and gold. None of the people of the priests were to be allowed to repeal any of these things, or say anything in opposition to him, or hold an assembly of the people without him, or be clothed in purple, or wear a gold buckle. Anyone who should do anything contrary to these decisions or nullify any of them was to be held liable. All the people resolved that Simon should act according to these decisions. So Simon consented, agreeing to become high priest and be the governor and ethnarch of the Jews and priests and the guardian of all. You know, this is structured the same way God's covenant was structured. Right, we talked about that with the Ten Commandments as sort of a smaller example. It starts out with what's usually called a historical prologue, where it's, here's what God has done. Okay, it's the Ten Commandments. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, brought you out of the house of bondage. Right? Here's what I've done for you. Therefore, here is now your obligation. Right? And the Ten Commandments. We have the same thing here. Here are all the amazing things that Simon and his family has done. Right? Even the Romans respect him. Those Romans, they don't just respect anybody. Right? And so, once we've laid out all of his greatness, none of the people or the priests can repeal anything or say anything in opposition to him. Right? Right? We get all our obligations to Simon. Right? And remember, when we were going through Chronicles, what was the big promise that they were supposed to be waiting for after the exile? God had made a promise to David, right? David was the one who God chose to be king. They chose Saul, right? God chose David, made a promise to David that a descendant of David's would always sit on the throne, right? And so they were supposed to be waiting for this Messiah, this anointed one, this descendant of David, who God was going to make their king forever, right? What does this say?
John.
It seemed good to us because of what Simon had done that he should rule over us forever.
He's already here.
Right? We're tired of waiting for God. This is our pick. Right? This is our pick. We pick Simon. Even the Romans love him. Right? And this is going to carry through. This is going to carry through. I always get the chills when I read it during Holy Week. I usually end up reading that part of the gospel. Where you remember when Christ is standing before Pilate, right? And he says, "What do you want me to do with him?" Basically, because Pilate sees no reason to do anything. Now he's trying to flog, and he's just going to let him go. He'd probably die from the flogging, right? And the people all scream, "Crucify him!" Right? And Pilate says, "You want me to crucify your king?" And they say, "We have no king but Caesar." Right? That's where this is going. This turn we took, the direction they're going, this is where that's leading. Right? The people have decided, just like they did back with Saul, when they decided they wanted a king the first time. And they picked someone like the other kings around them. Right? They've decided they don't want to wait on God's promises anymore. Right? They have their guy. And so when we get into the New Testament, even the ones who are still looking for a Messiah, the Messiah they're looking for looks a whole lot like Simon. Right? He's going to come and overthrow the Romans, make the Romans respect him again. Right? Win their military victories, feed all the people. That's what they're looking for. Okay? So this is, in case you thought that maybe it was just Jonathan, and that the people, out in the heartland were still on the right course. Here's the people speaking. Right? Okay, God, we know you gave us that covenant. We got a new one. And one that doesn't mention God once.
It does mention the prophets or something.
It says until we get a prophet. Yeah. But it doesn't mention God once.
And let me guess, when they do get a prophet, they don't listen.
Well, that prophet would be St. John the Forerunner.
Oh.
So you saw how well that went with Herod. Herod, by the way, is ruling on Simon's throne. Okay, when the descendants of Simon are going to rule on that throne until 65 BC, when the Romans officially annex Judea. When they officially annex Judea, they're going to put their own guy, Herod the Great, Herod the First, on the throne. And so the Herod who kills St. John the Forerunner is the grandnephew of that original Herod. Okay, but they're ruling on Simon's throne at that point. So verse 48, they commanded that this decree be inscribed on bronze tablets and be put in a public place near the sanctuary. Copies were also placed in the treasury, accessible to Simon and his sons. Chapter 15, then Antiochus, son of King Demetrius, sent a letter from the islands of the sea to Simon. So Demetrius is over in Persia in jail. Right? He sort of made it, well, he's got a son who also happens to be named Antiochus.
Carrying on the other dynasties.
Well, he's not king yet. But
Finding his
yeah.
name, and he's sort of trying to
Right.
naming him Antiochus the seventh, so that it sort of looks like he's on both sides.
Right. So Antiochus now we've got Demetrius the second son. He now sends a letter to Simon, the ethnarch of the Jews. Verse 2, it contained the following: Antiochus the king, to Simon, high priest and ethnarch, and the nation of the Jews, greetings. Since certain troublemakers gained the mastery over the kingdom of our fathers, namely Trypho, I wish to lay claim to the kingdom so I can establish it as it was before. I recruited a multitude of troops and prepared warships. I plan to go throughout the nation that I may pursue those who laid our country to ruin and desolated many of its cities. Now therefore I validate your tax remissions, which the kings before me forgave you, and whatever other payments they remitted for you. So again, no taxes that I'm not in a position to charge you anyway. I also authorize you to make your own coinage as money for your nation, and allow Jerusalem and the sanctuary to be free. All the weapons you prepared and the fortresses you built, which you seized, let them remain with you. Every money you owe the royal treasury, as well as future debts, let them be remitted from now on and for all time. As soon as we regain control of our kingdom, we will honor you and your nation in the temple with great glory, that your glory may be evident in all the earth. So he's essentially saying, you support my bid to come in here and see Trypho, I'll give you even more independence than you've had previously. In the 174th year, King Antiochus went to the land of his fathers, and all his soldiers went with him. Few sided with Trypho. When Antiochus went after him, he fled to Dora by the sea, for he knew that calamity had come upon him. His armies deserted him. Then Antiochus set up camp opposite Dora with 120,000 fighting men and 8,000 cavalry. He encircled the city, and the ships joined the battle from the sea. So he pressed hard against the city by land and sea, and did not allow anyone to leave or enter. Then Numenius and his men came from Rome with letters to the kings in their countries, in which the following was contained. Lucius, the Roman consul, to Ptolemy the king, greetings. The ambassadors of the Jews came to us as friends and allies to renew their long-standing friendship and alliance. They were sent from Simon the high priest and by the Jewish people, and brought a gold shield of 1,000 minas. Therefore it pleased us to write the kings in their countries that they not seek to hurt them or wage war against them in their cities and country, or form alignments with those who fight them. It seemed right to accept the shield from them. If therefore any troublemakers have escaped from their country to you, give them over to Simon the high priest, that he might prosecute them according to their law. The consul wrote identical letters to King Demetrius and to Attalus, Ariarathes, and Arsaces, and to all the nations, to Sampsames and the Spartans, and to Delos, Mindos, Seon, Caria, Samos, Pamphylia, Lycia, Halicarnassus, Rhodes, Phaselis, Cos, Cid, Arados, Gortina, Cnidus, Cyprus, and Cyrene. They also sent a copy to Simon the high priest. So basically all the neighboring kings, Rome finally decides to throw its weight around a little. Because remember, we're moving through history here. We're getting closer and closer to Roman Empire. We're now in the 1st century BC. We're about the 90s BC. Rome is starting to get a little more expansionistic, right? So they have this treaty with the Judeans. So Judeans are now their sort of foothold in the Eastern Mediterranean. Okay? So they decide to start, this is the beginning of them throwing their weight around. They send them a letter just saying, hey, just so you know, in case you forgot, the Judeans are our friends. You know, it'd be a real shame if anybody were to try to do anything to them, and we had to come out there, right? We had to send the Roman legions out there. That might not go so well for you, right? Because at this point, Rome is getting expansionistic, and what they're looking for excuses to start annexing territory. They're looking for excuses to start invading and coming in and saying, well, we had to, right? We had to come and make peace, and then, we came and we overthrew the king, and what are we going to do? We had to, sort of see to a peaceful transition, set up our own guy. So verse 25, meanwhile King Antiochus besieged Dora a second time, repeatedly launching his forces against it and building engines of war. He put Trypho in confinement so he could neither go out or go in. Then Simon sent Antiochus 2,000 chosen men as allies, along with silver, gold, and considerable weaponry. But Antiochus decided not to accept these things. He broke all the former agreements he had made with Simon, becoming estranged from him. Then he sent Athenobius, one of his friends, to confer with him, saying, you control Joppa, Gazara, and the citadel in Jerusalem. They are cities of my kingdom. You desolated their territory and caused great damage in the land, and you rule over many places in my kingdom. Now therefore give back the cities you took and the taxes for the places you rule outside the boundaries of Judea. Otherwise give me 500 talents of silver for them, as well as 500 talents more for the destruction you caused and for the tribute of the cities, or else we will wage war and defeat you. Okay. So Trypho now is taken prisoner. Antiochus here is now Antiochus the sixth, the king. Simon tries to do what his brother always did. Oh, we've got a new king, I'll be friends with him now. Right? Tries to send him tribute. And Antiochus the sixth says, no dice. Antiochus the sixth says, forget that letter I sent you before. You've taken a bunch of cities that should be in my kingdom. You owe me a whole lot of back taxes. And if you don't pay them, it's war starting now. Okay. Verse 32, when Athenobius, the friend of the king, entered Jerusalem and saw the glory of Simon and the sideboard plated with gold and silver, a magnificent display, he stood amazed. Then he reported the words of the king to him. Thus Simon answered and said to him, we have not taken any foreign land, nor have we captured foreign property, but only the inheritance of our fathers, which years ago was seized unjustly by our adversaries. It's easy to gloss over that real quickly. Okay. He just said all these cities we've taken back were the inheritance of our fathers that were taken from us unjustly. Compare that to, let's go back to say Nehemiah and Ezra. What did they say when they were talking to God about the exile? And about losing all that territory? It was justified, right? That what God did was right. That they had been wicked and so they deserved to lose that territory. Note the difference in perspective here from Simon. Right? It was taken from us unjustly. It's still ours. And whatever we need or want or have to do to take it, we're going to do. Verse 34, but now that we have occasion, we are holding firmly to the inheritance of our fathers. And as for Joppa and Gazara, which you want, their people were causing great damage to our people and our country. For them we will give you 100 talents. We had to go and invade them. Technically those were never part of it. We had to go and invade them because they were causing us a lot of damage. Does this sound familiar from any recent newspapers?
Yeah.
Just saying. We had to go in there and invade. They were. So he says. So he makes him an offer. He doesn't want to completely stonewall him. He says, technically, we had to go in there. We'll give you partial payment, right, for those cities. Verse 36, Athenobius said not a word in reply, but returned to the king in anger. When he relayed to him these words, plus Simon's splendor and everything he witnessed, the king was extremely enraged. Now Trypho had boarded a ship and escaped to Orthosia. So the king made Sendebus his commander-in-chief of the seacoast and gave him infantry, soldiers, and cavalry. He then ordered him to encamp opposite Judea, and further ordered him to build Kedron and strengthen its gates, and to wage war against the people. But the king himself pursued Trypho. When Sendebius arrived in Jamnia, he began to harass the people. He also invaded Judea, took people captive, and killed them. Then he built up Kedron and stationed cavalry and soldiers there so they could march through the roads of Judea, making roads as the kings commanded him. Then John traveled from Gazara and told his father Simon the damage Sendebius was inflicting. So Simon called his two oldest sons, Judas and John, and said to them, my brothers and I and my father's house have fought Israel's battles from our youth until this very day. Things have gone well for us so as to rescue Israel many times over. Now I have become old, and you by his mercy are men of maturity. Take over my position and my brother's role and go fight for our country, and may the help sent from heaven be yours. Okay. It's vague, it's a vague religion there, sort of. Right. Things have gone well for us. I mean, that's not exactly a, God saw fit, or good luck, right? We've had pretty good luck. Good luck to you. Thus John chose 20,000 fighting men and cavalry from the country. Together they marched towards Sendebius and encamped overnight in Modin. They arose early, marching to the plain. Behold, a huge army was marching out to meet them, infantry and cavalry. There was a stream between them. John and his army faced off against them, and when he saw that his troops were afraid to ford the stream, he crossed first. His soldiers saw him and crossed behind him. He then divided up the men, putting the cavalry in the middle of the infantry, for the enemy's cavalry was very large. When they sounded the trumpets, Demetrius and his army were routed, and numbers of them fell wounded. The rest of them fled into the fortress. Then Judas, the brother of John, was wounded, but John pursued them until Demetrius reached Kedron, where he had done construction. When they ran into the towers in the fields of Azotus, John set them afire, and roughly 2,000 of their men perished. Then he returned to Judea in peace. Now Ptolemy, the son of Abubas, unfortunately it's a biblical name, but it's a pagan name. So you can't have your kid baptized Abubas. As tempting as that might be. Abubas, yeah.
Abubas.
Had been made governor to rule over the plain of Jericho. He had large hoards of silver and gold, for he was the son-in-law of the high priest. Now, that tells you how the social structures have changed, right? This guy, he's incredibly wealthy because, he's the son-in-law of the high priest. Wait a second. He was optimistic and full of determination to seize control of the country, so he developed an evil strategy to seize Simon and his sons by trickery. Right? So Simon's been ruling like the other rulers. Well, guess what happens when you rule like these other rulers? Right? You start having people fight over the throne. Now Simon was paying a visit to the cities throughout the country, concentrating on their needs. So he went down to Jericho along with his sons Mattathias and Judas in the 177th year, in the 11th month, the month of Shabbat. The son of Abubas received them with deceit in the little fortress called Dok, which he had erected, and he gave them a grand feast and hid the men there. So when Simon and his sons became drunk, Ptolemy and his soldiers emerged and grabbed their weapons. When they encountered Simon in the banquet hall, they murdered him along with his 2 sons and certain of his servants. Indeed, Ptolemy committed great treachery, returning evil for good. Ptolemy then drafted a report to the king about these things, and asked that he might send him soldiers to help and to secure their country and cities. He also dispatched soldiers to Gazara to seize John, and sent letters to military tribunes to come to him so he might give them silver, gold, and gifts. So he ambushes, he kills Simon, he kills 2 of Simon's sons, and then sends to Antiochus VI, hey, guess what? Right, send me some troops, we can go and take Judea back. Then he sent others to capture Jerusalem and the Temple Hill. But somebody ran ahead and told John in Gazara that his father and his brothers had been killed, and that he has sent men to kill you as well. When John heard this, he was deeply shocked. He captured the soldiers who came to crush him and killed them, for he discovered they were there to kill him. The rest of John's words and his war history and brave acts, which he did so courageously, plus the heightening of the walls which he built, and his other accomplishments, behold, they are written in the book of his high priesthood, from whence he was made high priest following his father, which is a book that doesn't exist anymore. Okay. Now look where this leaves off. Where this leaves off should say, if nothing else, if we haven't picked up on it along the way, that things have gone in a horribly wrong direction. The way this ends, right, with almost the whole family being assassinated. this one strangler left, should send us a message that this is not what God intended for his people. Right? And that they're moving headlong in the wrong direction. So that's the end of 1 Maccabees. Like I said when I was introducing Maccabees, 2 Maccabees takes place during the same time period. In fact, 2 Maccabees is kind of an interesting book. I'll talk a little bit more about this next week, but it's an adaptation of a 5-volume work that no longer exists. About the history of the Maccabean revolt.
That's why I'm on
But 2 Maccabees takes place during the time period of Judas Maccabeus and the original revolt, and it sort of gives us, it's sort of more zoomed in, right? We've now gotten sort of the broad strokes of the history, the kings going back and forth, and the politics and everything going on. This is now going to tell us the stories of particular people living during that time and particular things that happened in 2 Maccabees. So it's sort of same time period zoomed in closer. Okay, so we can see a little bit more of what was going on. So that's it for 1 Maccabees. This is the last really historical book we're going to read. Okay, So there's a little bit of a gap. I've alluded to it several times that in 65 BC, not long after this, Judea is going to get annexed by Rome. Herod the Great is going to get set up as the ethnarch. And then in 31 BC, at the Battle of Actium, Octavian is going to seize control of all of Rome and become the first Roman emperor, Caesar Augustus. And then after he's been Caesar for about 4 years, in the book of Luke, Jesus is going to be born. So there's only a tiny gap here in history from where we're leaving off here to where the New Testament begins. And that's what happens in that time. So Judea is annexed and most of the other territory around Egypt and Syria are conquered by the Romans. The Roman Empire is established. But so when we come back next time, some more zooming on the Maccabean revolt and the people who were living that time and what was going on in Jerusalem.
How do you think it would have turned out if we had gone with Demetrius?
Oh,
Yeah.
if you hadn't. Well, I mean, the reality is going from,
They would have been crushed.
yeah, going from the Old Testament leading up to it, he should have gone with no one. You know, he shouldn't have made treaties with any of these pagans. He should have restored Jerusalem to the way it should be. They should have appointed a high priest who was a descendant of Aaron. Right? Because remember in Ezra and Nehemiah, we had those huge genealogies all to show the priests are the same, you know, it's the same family, it's the same people doing the music, it's the same people doing it, you know. Here, it's, you know, people are fighting over who's going to be high priest just because it's a powerful position and you'll be rich. You know, which is the same, and that situation remains. I didn't comment on that. That situation remains into the New Testament. Okay, the high priests are from what are called the Sadducees, and they're a family. They're also descended from Simon and from the Maccabees. Okay, and they're appointed. The high priest is appointed every year, just like we saw Demetrius made him high priest in the bronze plaques. The high priest was appointed by the Romans. And that's why the Sadducees, there was the split between the Sadducees and the Pharisees and the rest of the Jews, because the Sadducees were seen as collaborators with the Romans, because they owed their power to the Romans. And the reason they're called Sadducees is that we haven't gotten to the book of Ezekiel yet. But the book of Ezekiel prophesies that when the temple is rebuilt, that it's particularly from the line of Aaron, from the line of Zadok. It's the descendants of Zadok, who was the priest under David, who was the faithful priest. It's from the line of Zadok that the true priests are going to come. Okay, and Sadducee is basically a Greek derivative of Zadokite. So they called themselves the Zadok, even though they weren't descended from Zadok at all. Right? Just like falsifying with the Spartans. They called themselves the Zadokites, even though they weren't. Right? To try to say that Herod's temple was the true temple, and that was the fulfillment of the biblical prophecy. So that's where the Sadducees come from. And the Sadducees, that's also the reason why the Sadducees, will see, only accepted the first 5 books of the Bible. They all accepted the Pentateuch, the Torah, as being scriptural. Because if you read much past that, you can see that they shouldn't be the high priests. So that's where that. But so yeah, that's where that. I mean, what they should have done is, again, had an Aaronite high priest. They should have found a descendant of David, preferably. You know, to someone in that line to be king. They should have trusted in God to protect them. You know, the same things that we've heard all along through the Old Testament that they didn't do. They still didn't do. You know, it's a lot of the same errors. It's just now they're committing them with the pagan Greeks instead of committing them with the worshiping Baal and with the Canaanites and the Phoenicians. So. So okay, unless anybody else has any other questions, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
And next week, 2 Maccabees.